Good morning. Welcome to Insa's Coffee and Conversation with Doug Cossa. Before we begin, we'd like to share a video from our sponsor. Okay. Due to difficulty, looks like the video is not playing, so we'll go ahead and get started with our program. Please welcome John Doyon.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us for Coffee and Conversation today. This morning, we're pleased to welcome one of our community's top leaders to our program. Before we begin, I'd like to share a couple of housekeeping notes. If you have questions, and we hope you do, please submit them through the questions box on the right side of your screen. We will do our best to get to all of your questions. Also, we're pleased to welcome members of the press to the call today. This is a reminder that this program is on the record. And finally, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Amazon Web Services, for their support of today's program. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Jordan Feinstein, Senior Account Executive for AWS, who will introduce our speaker. Jordan, over to you.
Thanks, John. On behalf of Amazon Web Services, thank you, Insa, for bringing together industry and government to hear straight from the source on the Defense Intelligence Agency's priorities, including modernizing the Joint Worldwide Intelligence Communication System, JWICS, embracing zero trust architectures to improve cybersecurity, adopting cloud computing to increase global capabilities and security, sharing intelligence with allies and partners, and leveraging technology to enable hybrid and remote work. These initiatives will enable our nation to outpace strategic competitors and maintain information dominance. AWS has been inventing in partnership with the U.S. intelligence community since 2013. Our cloud services are used today to store and process our nation's most exquisite intelligence information and help the IC scale, drive innovation, and improve no-fail mission-critical capabilities. As Amazon.com's CEO, Andy Jassy, says, there's no compression algorithm for experience. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker. Doug Cossa was appointed the Chief Information Officer of the DIA in July 2021. In this capacity, he leads a global organization of more than 4,000 staff and $1 billion in resources, providing the complete spectrum of IT services to the agency and the broader IC. He is also charged with overseeing JWICS, the federal government's top secret intelligence network. Previously, he served as DIA's Deputy CIO and as Deputy Director of the Mission Integration Division at ODNI. Please welcome Doug Cossa.
All right. Thank you, Jordan. Thank you, John. Appreciate the introduction, and it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Well, we're really glad you could join us today, Doug. Thank you for making time out of your busy schedule. And let's hop right into our discussion this morning. As Jordan mentioned, you've got some top priorities. Those include JWICS modernization and also DoDIIS modernization. And let's start the conversation there. Can you tell us first, though there might be some listeners who'd appreciate this, what exactly is the distinction between these two major IT networks, and what's DIA's role in their management?
Great. Yeah, it's a good question because a lot of folks don't understand DIA's role actually in the community and across the department. I compare it to like your own network at your home, to where you have a commercial service provider that provides you with internet that comes into your house, typically these days via fiber, into a modem and then a router, and then you send it to the various rooms or wireless, etc. And then you have all your devices hooked up to that. What makes DIA unique in my organization is that we're one of the very few agencies across the community that actually operates that full spectrum. So when you think about that analogy to your own home and the network that you use, that internet service provider, such as Comcast or Xfinity, etc., That's DIA for JWICS. So that's the wide area network, where we provide connectivity at the top secret SCI level for all federal agencies. Many think that's just for the intelligence community, but the reality is it's for any agency that needs to share or produce TSSCI information. So these are non-Title 50 agencies all over, outside of just what we would traditionally think of as the intelligence community. And then as you go down that stack, from the wide area network, DIA also provides the local area network. So it's that infrastructure, that architecture that connects agencies to JWICS. And then also everything that sits on that local area network. The equipment, such as computers, BTCs, VoIPs, everything, all the peripherals that we need to communicate, in addition to the applications. So we have a very robust role in developing applications on both the mission and business side, not only for the agency, but for the community. We're a service of common concern for many capabilities as designated by the DNI, international systems being one of them. So in addition to what you would traditionally think of in terms of connectivity within the US across agencies, we also do that with our closest foreign partners to share intelligence. So that's the full spectrum of what we do. JWICS is that wide area network that comes into your home or your agency. It's really, you can consider it the top secret network for the federal government. And then once you're inside the agency or your home, that's what we call DoDIIS. That's everything, that full stack that connects you to the rest of the world. And it's everything on there from, like I say, data, applications, security, peripherals, etc. That's what we consider DoDIIS, and we are a service to the community in both JWICS and DoDIIS.
Great. Well, let's dig a little bit into that though, because I know your priorities are to modernize both of these systems. So what are the challenges you're facing there, and what's the outlook as far as modernization? I'm sure there's some ongoing activities, but do you have some milestones ahead, and how's it going?
Yeah. So my priorities are really fivefold, and I set these when I came in as CIO, again, because we are a unique agency in the sense that we do the full stack. So first and foremost, it's people, and I know we'll talk about that a little later, so I won't dive into it right now. But it's certainly a pendulum. When I started in this community over 20 years ago, I was lucky enough to actually get a job. But we had the .com bust, and then it was very hard for technical folks to find a career and get started. I think that pendulum is continuously swinging, but in particular, we're all competing from the same resource pool. It is hard to recruit and retain technical individuals. So we'll talk about that a little later, but that's first and foremost my top priority. Is not only bringing folks in, but also retaining. But then on the technical side, I mentioned my priorities as JWICS, that wide area network. We tend to think about that in the context of advancements in terms of mobility and wireless and security, and that is absolutely part of it. But the foundation of where I'm concentrating right now is building that infrastructure that I can really spin off and expand upon. Sequestration over the years, particularly in 2008, 2009, when we had to take the cuts, and this is not specific to DIA, this is every agency across the federal government. In order to preserve what we consider mission, in the IC, that's collection and analysis, enterprise capabilities were really used as the bill payer for that. And when you think about that, that is, the HR functions. It's a lot of the business functions, in terms of contracting, etc. But IT was a big part of that, as was facility maintenance. So these were things that we considered expendable. We could accept risk in at the time. But what we didn't realize is now how integral IT is to every single function we do, whether it's collection or analysis. And when we used it as the offset, what we didn't do was obviously continue that maintenance, continue that modernization. And now we find ourselves today, over a decade later, in a significant technical deficit to where we need to modernize, not only to keep pace with where we need to go, but it's become the fabric. IT is the fabric of how we do business in the intelligence community and the department. I can't think of a single function that we do today to where there isn't a dependency. And we've seen that obviously with COVID and the expansion of telework, which we'll talk about. But IT, in that crisis, quote unquote, for COVID, what you typically think of as crises events, collection and analysis are the heroes of the day. But in this case, it really was IT. That's what brought us together and kept really the IC and the broader department functioning. So modernizing even just the basic refresh is a top priority for me. And that goes into the DoDIIS side as well. It's not just on the network equipment, the network infrastructure, but it's also what our users see in front of them day to day on the DoDIIS side, the desktop environment, that local area network environment. I always joke that IT is like oxygen. You don't really think about it until you don't have it. But now that that infrastructure is aging, we see that, users see that, and it's frustrating. And as a user myself, I get that. And so as DIA, not only within our agency, but as a service provider for the bigger community, we're making investments on modernizing and updating that infrastructure, even on the desktop side, through that whole thread of the wide area network. So those are my top priorities. The other areas where I'm really focusing is on international systems. Within that, we've seen this in current world events, whether it's the situation in Ukraine or otherwise around the world. Everything is done alongside of our foreign partners. We have really become one community for sharing, not only sharing intelligence, but also creating intelligence, and IT linchpin behind that brings it all together. Where I am now is what most agencies do, is we've developed kind of that older architecture of point-to-point systems, which really don't work for us anymore. Right now, I maintain over a dozen systems. Each one requires its own infrastructure, whether it's on the storage side or even identity management. But now, given the interconnectedness of events around the world, we have to bring in partners on the fly, and those services must be integrated. And really where I'm focused right now is consolidating a lot of that into one foundational environment that is fully integrated across the US and with our federal partners. And then my final priority gets into multi-cloud, which we'll talk about as well. We've traditionally gone, over the past 7+ years, and really one foundational architecture. And now, as that evolves and we bring in new services, new capabilities, new vendors, my challenge is going to be creating one front door and making sure that we have, those data access policies, that identity management, security across all of those different architectures, whether it's a multi-cloud or hybrid cloud approach. But it's one front door into that, and a lot of that goes into all of the customers that I support, and whether they're developing applications or infrastructure, of making sure that I have complete visibility across the management of that approach. Right now we're at a crossroads, just like we were years ago, where different components, different agencies, different elements within agencies really manage their own IT architecture. And we're not in that world anymore. But the crossroads is we could easily end up there, to where we have disparate architectures that don't talk to one another, because we didn't design it that way from the get-go. So my challenge as a CIO, especially being a service provider for the community, is developing that strategy to where we have complete visibility across all of those services, those cloud services, and that they're actually seamlessly integrated with some of the existing architecture that I still need to maintain. No doubt we're going to have a hybrid approach, to where there is infrastructure that I maintain on-prem, but that has to seamlessly integrate, because from a user perspective, we all want seamlessness, right? We don't want to have to think about where we are, and I think we've proven that we can do that where we are, especially on the low side, as we use various cloud services. But at the end of the day, it has to be seamless from a user perspective, where it doesn't distract them from the day-to-day functions that they have to perform. My biggest challenge, though, as CIO, as I mentioned, is really twofold. One, is going to be on that seamless integration of all of those services. We've gotten so used to working from home that I think our users really expect to have that same experience at work in a SCIF. We made a lot of progress in that area, but as I mentioned, that environment's changing with a lot of new capabilities coming online. And then the second is security, of course, and that's whether that's low side, high side, cross domain, across fabrics. That has to be balanced with the user experience as well. And that is a hard thing to do. I would say if there is one area of my job that is the most stressful, the most complicated, it's making sure that the experience from a user perspective isn't compromised, but at the same time, our networks and our infrastructure isn't compromised. So it's finding that right balance to where, if someone logs in, they don't have a 10, 15-minute login. They have that immediate experience, but it's balanced with the right security behind the scenes. And I've seen that pendulum swing over time. I've seen it swing multiple times over the past 2-3 years alone, as we've gotten into that hybrid work. But the real challenge for me and for a broader program is finding that right balance. So we're not introducing vulnerabilities, but at the same time, putting maximum flexibility in place. That goes back to workforce. In terms of keeping our workforce, we have a particular challenge because we work in secure environments that for years have been closed to the outside. Now that door is opening, and how do we strike that right balance between having that connectedness and that seamless integration between low and high? And that's really where our priorities stand right now.
Great. Well, hey, let me hop in and go back to a couple of things you mentioned, because I'd like to talk a little bit more about modernization, working with our partners in multi-cloud. And on the modernization piece, one of the major things that everyone's trying to get their arms around across all of the IC agencies and the Defense Department and others as well is, what can we do to, work with big data, advanced analytics, and artificial intelligence. So you need the infrastructure to be able to deal with all of that. And how does getting ready for AI, big data, advanced analytics, what are you doing in that regard as far as DoDIIS or JWICS?
Yeah, that's a great question, because you're right. When we think of AI, machine learning, all of those newer phenomenologies, we tend to think at it at the application layer, right? So what the user sees, but it's like an iceberg, right? That's only the tip of it. What's behind the scenes is the necessity for increased storage, increased network bandwidth, increased connectivity around the world. The reality is that a lot of the services that we use today are centralized here within CONUS, and more specifically within the East Coast, Northern Virginia CONUS, because that's where most agencies are. But that's not where our operations lie. And so as you think about things like, again, machine learning, artificial intelligence, whatever, it's data dependent, and the efficiencies of those capabilities is going to be directly correlated with the ability to access data. And that gets back down to JWICS and DoDIIS, right? JWICS being that superhighway that connects agencies all around the world, their users, really in a tactical sense in areas where we don't have connectivity. And then providing that interface into the work environment, right? So they can partner with colleagues and collaborate on really the bread and butter of what we do, which is collection and analysis of intelligence, and providing that to policymakers or warfighter. So all of that is dependent. There is a direct correlation, a direct dependency between those more advanced analytic capabilities that I would say that come from artificial intelligence and machine learning on the infrastructure we have to put in place. I always joke, well, I don't joke, it's real, is I used to be a system architect for overhead systems, so satellite systems. And what I saw time and time again is we think about what those satellites need to do, whether it's GEOINT or SIGINT or whatnot, but we always forget about the ground, right? Of how you get information down and get it to the users. And the same thing is true on IT, is we think about, at that top of that iceberg, the applications and the data, but we haven't thought enough about the connectivity of how we get it to where it needs to go. And that's really where I view my job as CIO for the Defense Intelligence Agency, is we run that back-end infrastructure for the community. And it's really up to us as the enterprise managers of JWICS and the desktop services around the community to get that to the user. It won't happen if we don't have that foundational infrastructure in place. And that's why I've really stressed that as a priority. We've made a lot of progress in partnership with our overseers, whether it's HIL or ODNI or USDI. I think we finally get that. And we're finally realizing that dependency that has to receive the priority just as much as what users see from their perspectives as well.
Okay. And let me loop back to multi-cloud for a moment. And there's a lot of multi-cloud environments across the IC. There are NSA, CIA, NGA, just to name a few. What's your vision for how DIA integrates across all these environments? And what's the architecture that you would want, and the challenges you face integrating? And then also we have a question here from one of our listeners. He says, can Mr. Cossa elaborate on what's meant by a multi-cloud hybrid environment? Thanks.
Sure. So we are no doubt going to go in a hybrid environment. A hybrid meaning, as the CIO, I'm still going to maintain my own data centers and my own infrastructure that I'm hosting out of those data centers. Whether it's because simply we don't have connectivity today, where those cloud access points need to be put in place in the future, or it's sensitive to where I need to actually have full visibility of what's happening. Within DIA, and I would say this is true across many agencies as well, I mean, we've certainly taken advantage of cloud services for our business applications. So things like our contract management system, our HR management system, all of those front-end business services, I've essentially moved all of those to the cloud. Mm-hmm. Where the decision comes down to for the mission side gets into the access, the coverage, the capacity, those requirements, and the security of what we need to manage. And I think the biggest dependency that we will have is the necessity to see the full thread of security of what's happening behind the firewall on the vendor side. Mm-hmm. That's where we're going to need to see how that plays out. Given the criticality of intelligence, we need full visibility into that. Some things we can accept some risk on, again, on the business side, but when it comes down to mission data, it's really going to come down to visibility in a security sense and the access to where those services, that data, that infrastructure needs to be accessed from. Right now, it does not exist. My role as the enterprise provider for JWICS is to look at where we need those cloud access points, and I'm working with vendors around the world to determine where those priorities need to be. But right now, that doesn't exist. And so that, at least in the near term, forces us into a hybrid environment where I'm still hosting a lot of that myself in my own data centers. But in the future, I think that pendulum will swing the other way, especially as we build up that infrastructure with vendors. And it's going to have to, right? Especially as we get into, I'm starting to see some opportunities to where a lot of our closest international partners, whether it be the Five Eye, they're also using cloud services. So there is a huge opportunity for integration. I think the challenges that I have, and we're all going to have with cloud services, is integrated data policies, integrated identity management. Most of the issues we have today come down to that of the access controls. And that's going to be tough, not from a technology perspective, but from a cultural perspective of how we share intelligence, given the sensitive nature of it. I mean, it makes sense, but where a lot of the vendor community is going to come in is helping with that integration across cloud services. And I really do think that industry is going to lead in the data access and the identity management area for the federal government. That's where we have a lot of requirements and dependencies, and I think that's where a lot of the big opportunities are going to come in.
Nice. Hey, thinking about identity management, that's a good segue to talk a little bit more about what we're doing with our foreign partners, because I think as we share intelligence at different classification levels with different partners, depending on who they are, whether it's a Five Eyes partner or NATO partners or other coalition partners, understanding how we do that the identity management would be a key part of that. What are some of the, what are you doing to make sure that we have timely, effective, robust connectivity? If we've got important intelligence we need to share with our coalition partners or allies, how do we get that to them in a timely way? And also, one thing from when I was in government, we always had a challenge. We wanted to find ways to collaborate using all the collaboration tools that analysts have on certain projects, and that was always a challenge to do because of the network issues. So can you talk a little bit about what we're doing in the foreign partner lane?
Yeah, so right now DIA's role is we manage probably what's known the best is Stoneghost. So that is a system that we host for the entire community on behalf of the ODNI. We're designated as a service of common concern for working with our Five Eye partners on collaboration services, and that's things like file sharing, chat, etc. What we lack, though, is the true integration of services between our native work environments, whether that's on the US side or on the Five Eye side. One thing that I've really put a big priority on this year is filling that gap, creating the bridge between our native environments and that Stoneghost environment. Right now, or I shouldn't say right now, where we were was we had email that wasn't fully integrated, right? So it's things we take for granted, like not having a common address book that I can select down, select a counterpart from, and just simply write an email. Not having shared chat where I can just look someone up and provide them, send a message. Not having file sharing to where I don't have to move something from one system to another. That's the way it's traditionally existed. Where we've been as a community has been from an approach of, no foreign first. Really, where current events have taken us, if there's ever any silver lining, is that we need to do, sharing first. And where we focused over the past year within DIA is we're fully integrating our essentially Five Eye employees to the agency, and we've developed a system called Torch, which is fully integrated on JWICS, meaning we now have between our DoDIIS environment, which I use as a US user, and our Five Eye integrees, shared services, those things that we don't tend to think about, but ease of data access, shared email, shared calendar, shared chat. We've now set that up of having a fully integrated domain with the Five Eye within the agency. And we've partnered with NGA on this, and we're rolling this out at NGA as well as part of a common service offering for DoDIIS, to where if you have that need for collaboration, with Five Eye integrees, we now offer this common environment through our DoDIIS services. So that's been our biggest priority over the past year, and I'm really proud of the progress that we've made in that. And we're starting to roll that out as a common service for the community as well, just beyond NGA and DIA. We've started to roll this out at many of the combatant commands and services around the world. The next challenge for us, and this is really going to be a partnership across agencies, is doing that beyond just the Five Eye, right? So as we head into these new intelligence problems, these new environments that require so you need partners and really adding coalitions, expanding contracting coalitions on the fly, having our native environment, our native high side environment seamlessly interacting with other nations is really where we need to go. And that's a far more complicated architecture, but it's definitely the next phase of the evolution that we need to take, is going beyond just Five Eye.
Hey, let's, so by the way, we're getting a lot of really great questions in from our audience, so thank you for that. And one of them is related to zero trust. So as you know, with the White House direction that zero trust be implemented across government, what are DIA's plans and timing for moving to zero trust architecture?
Yeah, so this is, like I said, DIA is unique in this area, and I should say we partner with NGA to provide our desktop environment. But what's key for us is we don't just do it for ourselves, we're doing it for the whole community as we extend our desktop environment out and as we extend the wide area network, JWICS, out. Zero trust happens at every level. So let me start with really how I define it, because there are a lot of definitions, that I hear across agencies, across vendors, etc. But really, what it comes down to is continuous verification, right? Of not just the users, but the devices on the network, the applications, the data, the network traffic. But at the end of the day, what we want is if there's a threat that we can isolate it and protect the rest of our environment. That's how I define zero trust. For our environment, it happens at the wide area network, as I mentioned, on the JWICS side, and it happens on the local area network in that desktop environment. But the key is automating our responses to that. We don't have that today. Where we are is a very manual process. Now, given we have very robust business practices in place to do that, I would consider our approach for where we are at this point in time robust. But as we move into building out this IT environment and extending it out, whether that's across agencies or with our foreign partners, we need more automation in there, particularly the automated responses to threats and the activity logs that we're consistently monitoring. When I started in this community, it was a while ago, but my first job was as a network administrator and database administrator as well. And a big part of my job was every morning and every afternoon logging in and manually looking at all of the logs. Where we are heading towards now, or we're already there, is automating a lot of those functions. And over time, again, going back to where we were in sequestration and the cuts that we've had to make across the government, we've kept a lot of those kind of archaic processes. We have a lot of shadow IT out there to where we're using many of those old methods for security. The challenge that every CIO has is now identifying all of that disparate architecture and wrapping it under one zero trust model. This is going to be obviously important as we go into that multi-cloud approach, as I mentioned. But getting all of the unmanaged devices under one tent, or at least metaphorically speaking, one cybersecurity approach, and then also getting all of those legacy systems in. That's going to be key for us. And I think we're making a lot of progress in that right now, but we have a ways to go. But as I mentioned, where industry is going to help us, it's going to be in helping with the identity management, the PKIs, the data access capabilities that align with our policy. One priority I have for doing that is our capability delivery pipeline that I'm partnered with NGA on right now. And this is really multifaceted, but it goes back to that concept of having one front door in. And that's not only so I can manage, what services we're using where and have full visibility into it, but also how I can overlay those data policies, the security policies to get us to zero trust, to get us to more broadly integrated connectivity with other agencies and partners. But one front door, one pipeline for applications and infrastructure that comes in to our networks, right? So whether that's SNP or SIP or JWICS, we have one front door and one pipeline that we're overlaying all of these standards and policies. Today, we don't have that. Today, that, again, goes back to multiple factors, but today we have, I would say across the IC and the department, many different front doors to get in. And the key is really having one thread to where we manage this in one place.
Great. Hey, I want to loop back to something you said at the top of the program when you talked a little bit about recruiting and retention of workforce as being one of your top concerns. And I wanted to look at one aspect of that, and that is, I understand you've got a neurodiversity effort going on. And it's something that I'm mentioning because I know Insa and our foundation have been working to promote hiring of neurodiverse talent across the IC, and I know NGA has a program that is underway. I thought I'd love to, listeners would like to hear some about what DIA is doing in the neurodiversity lane and how that fits into your overall recruitment and retention efforts.
Sure. Yeah, great question. So, you know, when I opened it up, I mentioned that one big priority for me as CIO of Defense Intelligence Agencies, but for every CIO is going to be the recruitment and retention of technical talent. You know, that is a challenge as we're all pulling from one pool. And it's getting tougher and tougher to keep the great folks and the people that we need to run our enterprise. Part of that strategy, though, is opening up into new populations that have been overlooked over time. And when you look at Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act, which applies to IT, there has been an exemption for the intelligence community and the department because of security and the nature of what we do. We have now taken a new approach across the IC, and ODNI has helped really lead the direction in this, is to not look to that exception, but to look to how do we make our IT environment the most accessible it could possibly be. One of those areas is in neurodiverse, and the reality is this isn't new. We have a lot of neurodiverse individuals in our community now, but we haven't recognized the requirements for how they operate in our environment, and how we, in our recruiting pipeline for that as well. We have partnered DIA, we have partnered with local schools to recruit neurodiverse and really develop a more, I would say, in tune hiring process to their needs. As you know, security is a big part of that, whether it be polygraphs or other means through our security pipeline, but that requires very unique training from all the individuals, ranging from security to HR, to how we provide IT services to those individuals and the accommodations that they need. So we have, I'm proud to say that we've extended through our partnership with some local schools, offers to neurodiverse individuals that are joining our agency. So it's really exciting for us. And we've also expanded that approach with other populations with disabilities or more unique approaches to recruiting, such as high school recruiting. A lot of times, especially in the technical field, we've placed emphasis over the years on technical degrees, when the reality is that many individuals, especially on the cybersecurity side, have the skills needed. And so we've started to develop partnerships with local high schools, and I should say expanded that across the US for high school recruiting. So recruiting right outside, whether it starts with an internship or full-time employment right out of high school. And then finally, another area that I've emphasized over the past couple of years is on deaf and hard of hearing. This was especially a challenge. We were having a conversation earlier before this started about whether or not one of us was in a skiff and being able to call from in there. And that has been a challenge for the deaf and hard of hearing community. When you think about it, things that we take it for granted, like calling a friend or a family member, or trying to make a doctor's appointment, easy for us to do inside a skiff, with a phone. But for individuals that need to sign and call an interpreter on the outside to make a doctor's appointment, they would have to go to their car, right? Walk out, get their phone out of their car, which is something that we don't typically think about. And what I was able to do as CIO is start looking at these unique requirements, and we've actually offered now an integrated voice and video capability that's become the standard for the intelligence community for how we provide those services within a skiff in a secure way to our deaf and hard of hearing employees. And it's been quite a success. DIA is now representing the community, the intelligence community, on the Federal Disabilities Council, and this has been in partnership with ODNI and many of the other agencies in the community. But I would say, in this area, this is one of the closest partnerships that I've had with other CIOs in taking the best of breed capabilities that we've had and extending it across other agencies. We're all, advanced in some areas, not all, but ODNI has really taken a leading role in bringing us together and taking the best of breed and extending it across. But for DIA, whether it's neurodiverse, deaf, hard of hearing, or even looking at some of those underprivileged, underserved communities, especially with high school recruiting, we've made it a big part of our hiring strategy. And no doubt the trajectory is going to continue in that area.
Great. Hey, we have time for just maybe one or two more questions, and we're getting a lot of questions in from our probably our industry partners here regarding contracts and acquisition and outlook for contract award priorities that you may have from your role at the CIO, and also there may be some delays in the acquisition and award of contracts. Can you fill us in on what you see as far as your priorities and how things are going in the contracting area?
Sure. So contracting is certainly a challenge. I mean, it is a challenge given not just for DIA, but for the broader IC. Kind of goes back to what I was saying of the challenges working in a secure environment. Where we have a challenge across the board is on workforce issues. It's not just with IT, but it's a lot of those enterprise services such as contracting, HR, security, that at one point in time, doing that within a SCIF in a secure environment, that was just commonplace. Now with COVID, there's a lot of telework, a lot of hybrid work environments, and those individuals I now have options of working in other places, which has really hurt us in terms of providing some of those more foundational enterprise support capabilities, because we do see individuals leaving to go to other agencies, going to other areas where hybrid work or telework is more commonplace. And contracting is one of those areas. You may have seen a lot of requirements coming out, whether it's on your Facebook or LinkedIn feed of advertisements from agencies in the contracting, contracting realm, acquisition realm, to beef up our recruitment, and that's why, because it is a challenge right now for DIA and other agencies. So in terms of priorities for where we get, it's exactly the things that I've talked about, at least in the IT realm. It's in the JWICS portfolio of getting that contract award out. That's probably the biggest one that we're going to see for this upcoming FY. In DoDIIS, in the technical refresh, the integrated services, the multi-cloud services that we're looking at, we'll see that as a priority. And then on the DevOps side, as we develop that capability delivery pipeline, that's also going to be a priority for us. But first and foremost, for DIA specifically, it's JWICS. That starts within FY23. That goes over the next 5 years. We have a lot of work to do. The initial awards will start with tech refresh, and then we'll get into some of the more advanced zero trust, mobility, network segmentation types of capabilities that really are going to bring us into the future. But those are our priority areas for contracting.
One last quick question. You mentioned telework, and there's a lot of questions here. Where does DIA stand on telework, especially are there any initiatives relating to making provisions for classified telework?
Probably not classified telework, right? Because at least for DIA, we predominantly operate at the TS level.
Right.
But telework will remain. We've set up a very robust infrastructure during the course of the past couple of years. As far as I know, we are the only agency right now that is IL5 FOUO in our telework environment. And we're expanding that to go full virtual desktop with all of the related services that you would be able to access from home. So everything that we've stood up, we're not only planning to continue that, but we're going to expand as well.
Okay. Hey, well, thanks, Doug. We're out of time, but I'll give you one last chance here if you have any closing thoughts for us.
No, I appreciate the time. If there's one takeaway that you've heard me say is integration is going to be key in the IT field, and that's where the vendor community needs to help. Where we get off on isolated one-off services, that's no longer going to be a reality for us. It's going to be the integration across all of those services and architecture is going to be the key to success.
Okay. Well, thank you, and thank you again for joining us. Hope you have a good rest of your day. I'd like to also thank Amazon Web Services for supporting today's program, and to everyone online. I'd like to thank you for taking time to join us. When the webinar ends, there will be a short survey that pops up. Please take a few moments to complete it and let us know how we did. Looking ahead, on Thursday this week, August 25th, from 2 to 3, we're going to hold a virtual fireside chat on implementation of the IC's commercial GeoInt strategy. We'll have Dave Gauthier from NGA and Pete Moon from NRO joining us, and Teresa Hitchens from Breaking Defense as the moderator for that program. Also, in early September, we'll be holding the final installment of the Insa Foundation 2022 Future of the IC Workforce webinar. This program is underwritten by Advantis, called Mission Integration, will be on September the 6th from 2 to 3 with speakers Nick Adams, who's from the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence Staff, Nitin Natarajan, the Deputy Director of CISA, Kirsten Wood, CEO of the Gristmill, and Lindsay Kaiser of clearancejobs.com. And they'll have a great discussion on those issues. Also on September the 8th, we'll be back here for coffee and conversation with Gil Herrera, who's the Director of Research at NSA. We'll talk about NSA's research priorities, challenges, the outlook for high performance computing, AI, ML, quantum encryption, much more. And then on September the 15th and 16th, we hope you'll join us for our in-person Intelligence National Security Summit, which is at the Gaylord Convention Center at National Harbor, held in partnership with AFCEA. This year's program will touch on a number of key issues, including Chinese threats to supply chains, public data and its impact on analysis within the IC. Of course, we'll talk about the Russia-Ukraine conflict, midterm election security, and much more. And for a final note, Insa opened nominations for our annual Achievement Awards, which recognize outstanding early to mid-career professionals in the intelligence, homeland, and national security community. These awards are an excellent opportunity to honor rising stars in your organizations. You can find out more about this at our website, insaonline.org. This concludes today's program. Have a wonderful day.